Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Dental Community Resource. Today is our 10th edition of Tuesdays at 2, and on behalf of Steve, Minor, and the rest of our faculty, I'd like to welcome you back to our 10th edition, and I'd like to recognize our faculty who continue to contribute from week to week, particularly these last few days as we've been busy processing and interpreting the guidelines that were released to us. I'd also like to recognize our staff for great support from one week to the next. So today's topic is the State of the Union. We're here today to try to have a better understanding of where we are now in light of the missing piece of the puzzle, which was the availability of guidelines by the Royal College of Dental Surgeons of Ontario. It's safe to say that the best thing for us to do would be to not allow the virus to enter our office. We had this discussion last week, but clearly we can't do that. In our 11th week, we are all feeling the significant impact of not being able to be working, to be productive, and we're constantly struggling and juggling the two realities of our economic viability, which is becoming abundantly clear to us today, and doing this in a safe manner, safe for our staff, safe for our patients, and safe for us and our families. Last week, in the absence of guidelines, we had dedicated quite a bit of time to discussion about developing and testing new business systems as they relate to clinical, administrative, and lab-related issues. We also talked about, in preparation of guidelines, thinking of triaging patient care, where we're weighing safety and economic viability. Let's just look around us. I think this front page of New York Times is really quite poignant this week, reminding us of the devastation that this pandemic has created in the United States. If we look here in our own province with the data as recently as this past Sunday, we can see that we had a spike in the last few days, which directly relates to events that occurred around Mother's Day, where people started to feel a sense of release, and we're probably not social distancing as well as they're expected to. These have had obviously a profound impact on the numbers, and this conversation about observing and watching the numbers is going to be critical for all of us as we move forward. Just a reminder, you look at the arrow here of where we started when we were shut down on Sunday, March 15th. All of you, I'm sure, reacted one way or the other to the email we received on Friday, May 22nd at 4 p.m. An interesting email that was dated for Monday. One can speculate why it was released a few days earlier, but we all had a response to this, an initial immediate response as first of all, there's one of anticipation and also one of starting to process the 13-page document that was provided to us. It's safe to say that 10 weeks ago, and we referenced this in our first gathering of the Tuesdays at 2, our regulators were in an impossible position as the pandemic started to unfold. It was an incredible task for them to try to make sense of how dentistry was going to fit into the world of COVID. It's safe to say that today and for the past few days, some of us would argue that we are now in an impossible situation. I'd like to hear from Steve. What were your thoughts? How did you react to this email?
You know, I was anticipating this email. I was hoping it was going to arrive, and when it arrived, I really did have a pretty visceral reaction. I'm mostly disappointed in the amount of work it was going to require for us to get ready. And when I speak of us, I mean the entire community. I was hoping that we would not be punished, those of us who contributed, PPE early on in this process at the request of the public health and college, and now we have guidelines that really is punishing us for that decision. I was disappointed in the aerosol section of this document, but and I really started to, and through the weekend, really talking with many people and many of the people that are on this call with us today, I realized there's three different schools of thought, three different pathways that people are starting to think. One is, the document clearly states, and we'll discuss it a little bit in a moment, how this, we're going to come in and out of the amount of regulation depending on the pandemic, depending on the virus itself. So one strategy might be to avoid all of this get ready is to wait it out, till the numbers come down and then restart your business. And that may not be an economic reality for many people. Another one is anger and the feeling that we've been led astray by our regulators and leaders. And that's a kind of a good feeling. And it gives us a sense of control. And I certainly understand why a lot of people feel this way, and put a lot of energy into trying to protest, to change these regulations. But I think that, when I look at it from my position as a dentist, trying to take on public health, that's going to be a huge undertaking. And there's a third group of people that are saying, okay, we asked for regulations. You asked us to tell us, the scenario we used last time, what race we're getting ready for. You told us, let's get ready. Let's get practical. Let's just try to get this done. So I decided I don't have enough energy to get my practice back to where it is, fix this economically, take care of patients, take care of staff, take care of my family and myself. I'm going to focus on get ready, and that's where this dialogue is going to be mostly. Manor?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, when I got this document, it was 4:15 or so in the afternoon, just a few days ago on Friday, and holy cow, I've been waiting for this day after day, and my gut feeling was, oh my God, I'm so tired of this. I think it's been dragging on for so long, and you see how elsewhere in North America and Canada, things are opening up cautiously, and there's, you get the perception it's moving forward, and here we are, and still the N95s, the aerosols, the closing of the rooms. I was so tired of this, like really. And that was the gut feeling in me. And then I just, took a deep breath, and the rational side of me said, all right, it is what it is. And Steve, you hit the nail on the head. It's a public health issue. That's the bottom line. And all right, let's deal with it. And for me, it was by 5 o'clock, I was already at Home Depot trying to get some things to already get going. Not being irrational and buying half the store, but I was already in Home Depot by 5 o'clock on Friday with my trade on the phone, and just trying to move forward still cautiously. But it's not what I was hoping for, and so many of us on this call were hoping for, I'm sure. And we'll elaborate on this as we move along the next half hour or so.
Thanks, guys. I think it's important to note that these three camps or three responses to the document are not exclusive of each other. I think one can get ready and be active in demanding that things are continued to be looked at as we move along. So let's do that. Let's tease out the two documents. There was a one-page document that was released on Friday, which looked at the definitions of emergency, urgent, and non-essential care. And just as a matter of interest, the definition of emergency has not changed. There's been no change from the April 24th document. Same criteria apply. When it comes to urgent care, there actually have been 4 changes in this document worth noting. And the way this was presented, it's easy to have possibly missed it. So let's just cover the differences here. So an addition was urgent care can be described as extensive caries or defective restorations causing pain, suture removal, denture adjustments or repairs where function is impeded. This opens up a world of removable pros for those patients who already have prostheses that require attention. And the fourth point, which I think is quite important for us to focus on, which we will revisit in a moment, is this statement here, where other procedures that in the dentist's professional judgment are necessary in order to minimize harm to patients and or relieve pain and suffering. And we'll circle back to this in just a moment. Non-essential care has not changed. The definition of non-essential care has remained the same, but in the frequently asked questions, which has also been updated on May 22nd, there are extensive questions, specific questions, common questions that members of our community are asking. They address the issue as it relates to non-essential care, with the question being, can I provide non-essential care through teledentistry? So just as a reminder, teledentistry enables the remote provision of non-essential care to patients while ensuring ongoing physical distancing. So it respects that very important rule. They gave some specific examples of non-essential care that can be provided through teledentistry, such as patient education, instruction, advice or counseling, assessment or evaluation, monitoring or follow-up, and consultations and treatment planning for new patients or those of records and for existing or new conditions. So this category, the category of non-essential care, at this point in time is going to be addressed through teledentistry. The big document obviously was the 13 pages that is described in the Managing Infection Risk During Inpatient In-Person Dental Care. I think it's important to circle, to focus, on these 8 points. That's where the foundation that provided guidance for all the stakeholders that were consulted, I believe, as expressed to us in the email we received. So we were reminded of the following, and this just forms the basis. It just gives us, I guess, some insight into the thinking. So as dentists, we have a professional, legal, and ethical responsibility to provide care that's safe and effective. The health and safety of our patients, number 2, is our top priority. So again, a reinforcement of the message of safety. Number 3 was the college's guidance is informed by the direction of the Chief Medical Officer and the Ministry of Health. That's where everything that follows is coming from that primary source. Patients need continuity of care. This is just part of our ethical responsibility, and we need to be there for them. Patients have to access point number 5, oral care must be balanced with the risks of spreading COVID-19. And we talked about this at our Tuesdays at 2, and we talked about elimination, administrative controls. But guidance number 6 is based on the best available evidence and data. And clearly this is obviously a bone of contention for some members of our community because the evidence is only emerging. It's definitely not conclusive, and there's a lot of evidence that contradicts each other. Number 7, that a return to practice will occur in stages, and we're going to elaborate on this idea, this concept of stages of return to a new normal. And number 8, as I mentioned earlier, that the colleges will prioritize teledentistry to really enforce this message of social distancing. So let's talk a little bit about this staged approach to return to practice. This was a part of the document that the 3 of us spent a lot of time deliberating in these last 3 days, trying to understand what it really means. So what we're told is that our ability to provide in-person care will take place in one of these stages. We were told that we're in stage 2, and that's defined as community transmission declining, which is obviously somewhat of concern right now. We're looking at the numbers, and dentists will be permitted to provide an expanded list of in-person services. And they introduced the concept here of essential care, which I'll elaborate on in a second. So if we look at where we're at from today, and we look at what's on the horizon, which will be a vaccine, not for several months, most likely sometime next year, we're going to be going back and forth between stages 2, 3, and 1. Right now, the understanding is that we are in stage 2. But as the numbers change outside, whether it'll be a second wave in the fall, as is likely to happen, we may be switching back and forth. So this is a new way of thinking of care. We've never really thought of ourselves as being locked into a stage. It was just the one stage, the way we always practice. And this is in keeping with the information that's definitely coming from public health. So the arrows will remind us that we're going to be switching back and forth. And so these guidelines are relevant to the information we have today, which is stage 2.
And I think, John, it's important to mention that if you go back to that slide for a moment, that the guidelines that we received and all the restrictions and all the precautions, they apply to stage 2 only. So what this can be taken from us. The ability to treat more urgent care can be taken from us as the pandemic changes. If it gets worse, we might go back to straight just emergency care. And then when hopefully soon the incidence of this disease starts to reduce, we can switch over to stage 3. And the people that have said to do nothing, what their strategy wasn't do nothing and give up dentistry. Their strategy was to wait till the restrictions are less, or there's reduced precautions that will occur in stage 3 and wait this out if it's only a month or 2 away. That was the thinking on the people who decided to do nothing. I just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
And if I could add, when I saw this, and I thought, oh, holy cow, it's not related to the state of emergency anymore. in terms of the guidelines, like we've been told for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now there's actually a different system that we're considering in terms of moving forward or backwards. And what I've also heard right away over the weekend from a lot of our DCR friends is there might be no end in sight. Not to be the bubble burster, but when you see the numbers in Ontario, especially in Toronto, it's almost like Toronto's ruining it. I'm sorry for so many of our friends around Ontario. But this is when, almost like following a game and the score, I feel like I need to follow the numbers now. It's been over 400 now for several days. So are we going to stay in stage 2? If it gets worse in the fall, we're going to go back to stage 1. I don't know. But now all of a sudden we have more information. And on the one hand, you might think, oh, there's no end in sight. But on the other hand, at least now I think we have more of an idea of what the college is thinking, or what I should say public health is thinking also.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to think of it in terms of the stages. I think it as Steve mentioned, once we get to stage 3, the expectation is there'll be a set of guidelines that match the degree of community transmission, and that's what we can anticipate. So these stages are not static. As community transmission ebbs and flows, we're going to be moving forwards and backwards, as we stated. So we've established we are now in stage 2. So we've been given some sense of where we belong in the trajectory of the pandemic as it relates to care. In-person care must be limited to essential care only. Once again, this is a new term, which we're going to expand in a second. And non-essential elective services will be provided via teledentistry. So what is essential care? Because initially, all we had was emergency care. April 24th, we were introduced to the concept of urgent care. And now we're given a third classification, a third category described as essential care. Essential care includes emergency care. It includes urgent care with those 4 new additions that I referenced earlier. And this very important quote from the document, which describes procedures which in the dentist's professional judgment are necessary in order to minimize harm to patients and or relieve pain and suffering. Let's expand on that for a second. So our professional judgment on these necessary procedures to minimize harm and or relieve pain and suffering is what we're going to rely on, whether we deem the needs of a patient to be essential or not. Through personal communication we've had with the Royal College in the last day, we can expand on that, and it also relates to conditions that have been deteriorating, threaten to become an emergency, and require definitive treatment to resolve. So that broadens the scope of what kind of care falls under this essential care banner. You guys want to add anything to that?
I would. I actually was happy to see that there's some definition, even though a lot of our dear members would want some black and white answers. I was happy to see that this was included because for weeks and weeks we hear from our dear DCR friends saying, well, what if there's a large carious lesion and it's going to turn into an endo any week now? What do I do? Now, using our clinical judgment, with good intentions, with good ethics, I think now we have a little bit more guidance to look after these patients that we have not been able to look after for weeks and weeks. So even though at first my gut feeling was, oh my God, I'm so tired of this document. And on the other hand, as I started reading this whole document, I realized, good, I actually have more information now than I had on Thursday. And this is one of those examples.
One of the questions in the frequently asked questions section, again, which was updated May 22nd, is, can I provide essential care to my patients? And the answer is yes. Limit your in-person services to this essential care, which we've just described. Since clinical advice is rapidly evolving, another concept I think that is really important to highlight with this document is that the information is emerging quite rapidly. Constantly and frequently check this section on the RCDSO website. And embedded in the thought process, as Manor just said, is to put our patients' interest and the safety of the community first. So with those criteria in mind, then yes, indeed, we should limit inpatient services to essential care.
And can I add, John, it's becoming painful now for so many, understandably, for almost 3 months. We've been shut down, no income, we still have expenses. It's a legitimate concern. But this last comment of yours, John, shows us it pays to be safe in many ways, the obvious health way, but also financially. I mean, I think if we put our patients' interest and safety first, it's good business. I mean, God forbid, can you imagine there's an outbreak in a dental office and it makes the news? That office is shut down, let alone what it does to everyone else. So not to mention the confidence that you need to bring to your patients to bring them back in, and your staff also. So it pays to be safe, as frustrating as it is.
And I think, John, the next slide is even better to what I was going to speak to. I think, John, the question when you read that guideline is it really does open up to some of those unfinished treatment plans that we have that we know are deteriorating, sitting there over time. Does that really give me now the license to start calling them back and saying we can, do this at this time? And I think being safe is the guideline. Is this a green light for some people? And I think it's, in my opinion, and we can discuss this, the three of us, in my opinion, it's far from a green light. It might not even be an amber light. It might be where before the red light was a hard stop, we might be able to make a right turn now. We might be able to start to move towards a destination, but with extreme caution and taking again into the best interest of this patient. Is this patient a high risk patient? Is this patient, can we keep them safe? Is the pandemic, what's going on the numbers outside, is the community transmission at a point where this is safe, all within this stage 2. There's lots of things for us to consider. And I do appreciate the college allowing us to use our professional judgment rather than giving us a hard stop. So maybe it's more like an amber light. You can proceed, but with lots of caution. And there's no risk in going through an amber light. There's considerable risk, and we have to think about that.
I think that's a great analogy, and really that's where we belong, right? It's on a patient by patient basis, reconciling so many variables to make sure that indeed what we're proposing satisfies the essential care criteria and is in the patient's best interest as far as their safety. So last week we introduced the idea of, we were getting ready. We were getting ready for a race. We didn't know what that race looked like. We weren't sure we were training a horse or getting ready for a bicycle race. What we did find out now is the kind of race that we're in. And we've been given specific guidelines as they relate to PPE engineering control, which we're going to walk through in just a moment. So we've got that clarity. In the week, we had a chance to look at elimination and administrative control and substitution policies in our office. Now we actually can focus in on the details that have been spelled out for us.
And in fairness, we asked them to identify the race. We got the race. We might not be happy that it's so complex, but it is what it is, and we have to get at it.
And if I can even add to that, this race that now we know we're in, we have to remember that as frustrated as we are and as eager as we are to jump in there, okay, now we know it's a Formula One race, for instance. We know better what we need to do, but we still need to sort of hold back a little bit. As much as our gut feeling says, no, I got to go out there, I got to buy this and this and this. And we're being bombarded with people and with industry. But remember, if you're not ready to open up your practice according to the rest of the guidelines, PPE and whatever might be the issue, maybe you can hold off for even just a few days or 5 days or a week before you go out there and you buy 20 of these air filtration systems that these reps are trying to sell us during these webinars, and maybe hang on just a little bit. Do your research and remember, okay, there's no gun to your head unless maybe you're seeing a patient tomorrow morning, then it's a little bit different. But even then, even if you don't have the 20 top-notch air filtration units, okay, maybe you wait then to 3 hours. We still can treat patients, but we can't panic in that sense and be taken advantage of by so many bad actors out there that are out there and trying to financially benefit on our fear and our frustration after so many weeks.
Agreed. This is what the document really dedicates probably a good 2/3 to, is engineering controls and PPE. Let's go through that together. We've broken it down into 4 main categories. The first being preparing the office with a list of different criteria. And maybe Steve, you can comment on the general staff requirements, something that struck you in that section.
Yeah, one of the big challenges I think is to try to not have too much staff congregating together at one time. For those of us who have larger staffs, the idea of having several people congregating in washrooms and in common areas is a concern. So many of us have chosen to open the office slowly, bringing back staff as the community resource is, or the community transmission is still very prevalent. We're going to try not to have too many staff in the building at one time or in the premises at one time, and looking at that, managing that as one of the challenges we've had in going forward, especially in this stage 2.
And Manor, maybe you can comment on what struck you looking at the office setup.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of this document, when you really pick it apart, you realize a lot of it is the same as what it was on Thursday in terms of the guidelines. Office setup, for instance, aside from now knowing, okay, we got to close our rooms if we're producing aerosols, but read it carefully, and remember, you also need to have one common entry and exit point. That's it, one. So you even limit that in terms of going to the office. On the elimination side, interesting, when we had Dr. Kevin Katz several weeks ago, and on the elimination, trying to eliminate the aerosol production, it's stuff we've been talking about now for weeks and weeks, but now we have it in writing, more of an understanding. And when you pick it apart, I sort of feel a little bit more at ease in that, okay, I have more information. The more information, the less fear there is. And that's how I'm starting to rationally look at this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think as we've done over the weeks is the importance of reviewing these requirements with our staff, making sure that they understand and that they're comfortable so that we can indeed engage in essential care. The review of personal protective equipment is what we're going to focus on as we talk about providing dental care, which is the second main category. And here, there was a lot of reference to things that should be familiar to members of the DCR, because we've been talking about this for weeks, about how we want to strategically schedule appointments, how we manage patients when they arrive, minimizing patients running into each other, how patients are managed when they leave the office. We talked about potentially having front desks, which are not populated. Things can be done on the telephone. Ken Parrish, a couple of weeks ago, spoke to that, how a lot of these things are just managed on the phone, making, in his view, his sort of streamlined protocols, making things more efficient. And again, details on how to sanitize at the end of the day. The big item here, obviously, was the issue of PPE, and it was broken down into 4 different settings, where it was the operatory, the reprocessing area, reception, and then common areas. The big distinction, again, not new to us. This was introduced several weeks ago when we were introduced to the idea of the difference between aerosol generating procedures and non-aerosol generating procedures. And if we just focus in the interest of time on the issue of N95s, I think a lot of us probably flipped along in the pages here to get to this page to see what the requirement was, having read documents from other provinces in Canada and other states south of the border. I'll share with you my view. My first initial reaction was the concern I have of practicing with an N95 with loops and a face shield is just the difficulty in breathing, in being able to sustain that for the hours. So I'm concerned about having to do this. I understand that's what the guidelines state, but from a practical standpoint, I definitely have concerns about the practicality of this is what this is going to look like. What about you, Steve?
I'm more disappointed in the fact that those of us who followed the health guidelines and relieved of ourselves of our N95 masks to people who needed them more, the same health department is now saying you require them at this level, and it is the limiting factor for all of us. Many of us who have every other box ticked are not going to be able to return to providing services to our patients because this will be the limiting factor. And I'm also disappointed that it's going to, we talked before about how it was really our goal and our hope that we would be able to cooperate and not work one against one another. But this really does, this is a competition that's created by keeping us against each other, competing for this. I was disappointed in having this. And if the Department of Health asks for our masks, they should also help us try to get some somehow. I feel it's just some way, and I feel a little disappointed with this.
Yeah, Steve, you're disappointed. I felt frustrated, to be honest with you. Yeah, on the one hand, I remember I donated masks and gowns to a hospital, and you're right. Now we're limited, and yet we're asked to look after people and have continuity of care. And this N95 was probably the one thing I want to see more than anything else, because I feel from what I hear from our DCR friends and other colleagues, this is what's holding them back. And you hear elsewhere things are opening. You just get that frustrating, tired feeling. It's like, for heaven's sake, I want to look after these patients. I'm not being greedy. We're here to provide an essential service, but we're held back because we're so limited with N95s. And we know that it's so hard to find N95s. And I thought it would become a little bit more accommodating with the new guidelines. But then on the flip side, read this thing carefully. And like John, you were saying, read the facts, the frequently asked questions. And there's a section, can N95 respirators be used past their expiry date? I'm not telling you yes or no. Just read that section. There's a lot of information that may put us at ease, because we've been asked so many questions by the DCR community about all these things. There's a lot of information in this guideline and what the frequently asked questions also. But it is what it is now. Like, all right, let's wait till next guidelines. Let's see where the numbers are in Ontario.
Thank you. The third category is a big one from the standpoint of reaction on behalf of our community, and that's a response to aerosol generating procedures. The information that's available today, the evidence available today, is not compelling one way or the other. And so it's a reminder to all of us that the language that's used in this document, where aerosols may be generated by high speed, low speed, and other rotary handpieces, ultrasonic and other similar devices, and air water syringes. At this point in time, the guidelines, the PPE that match aerosol generating procedures have been defined for us. But I think this maybe is something we're going to see again and again as we move from stage 2 possibly to stage 3.
And John, I'm hoping that that's something that will be clarified a little bit more, and we're hoping to find out some more information to help dentists make the correct decision about that.
Yes. So as far as aerosol generating procedures, this is broken down into preparing the operatory, the use of PPE, mitigating risk with using high volume suction and rubber dam when possible. And obviously the big issue was the waiting time, the fallow time. When we were introduced to this idea on April 24th, there was only one number. We were told that rooms had to be kept shut for 3 hours. In this document, we've been given some more information. So we've now been introduced to a concept of air changes per hour. Probably most of us never thought of this. And we've also been given a standard of that we are expected to meet, and that is a 99.9% efficiency. You guys want to comment on this?
Yeah, I'm just a dental plumber, and I've never heard of ACH. Now I know so much about ACH. It's incredible. I was... Steve, you mentioned you're upset still with the aerosol issue. I think many of us are. I've come to a point where I've accepted a lot of these things, and I'm working with it and working on it to move forward. I was sort of relieved to know that, okay, there's something I can do to reduce the turnover time. I was actually happy to see this. It's just now I have to remember when I'm dealing with people to learn what my ACH is in my office, and HVAC people and these salespeople that just want to sell you their stuff and badmouth the competition and put fear in us. And, step back for a second, catch your breath, and work with this thing. And at least there's something we can do, but just don't let your fear and sort of, if I may say, desperation, be the thing that'll have others take advantage of you. Be very careful, because this is a big thing. Don't go out there and buy 20 of these filtration units if you're not opening up anytime soon, like I mentioned. But now we have some numbers.
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, again, I think that this was something that we can work with. I don't think that it's as ominous as it first seems. I think if you look in other jurisdictions where they do not have this requirement, it makes me wonder, do I want to be 10 times this standard? Do I want to really go out there? Is this really that essential? It's essential in meeting this guideline, but there might be relatively simple ways to get there. I think the bigger challenge for us is for those people of us who don't have rooms that are floor to ceiling contained. That becomes a bigger issue. This part of that issue isn't such an enormous challenge for us. And I think we had hoped, and we mentioned it earlier, that we were hoping that some kind of air exchange or air change would be able to mitigate the 90-minute or the 3 hours, and it has, and it's a reasonable request, I think.
And on top of that, I would even say, when you look at this, think practically. If you got 2 operatories and you can spend an hour on a restoration, maybe if you happen to have, depending on your setup, just a rooftop HVAC unit, maybe, I'm not an engineer, but you've got only 6 ACH, okay, within about an hour, you can turn the room around, which means you can almost function normally. So, when everyone says, I've got this filter, it'll give you 30, 40 ACH, maybe practically you don't quite need that right now.
And remember, when we're talking about the time, it's from the time of the last aerosol production, not from the time the appointment ends.
Right, just like Kevin Katz said several weeks ago, yes.
That's really important, right? Because that relates to this turnaround time. And Kevin Katz was with us on Tuesdays at 2 about a month ago now, had really emphasized that issue. An important reminder in terms of, as we're trying to work out the scheduling and the logistics of the patient flow as patients come in and others leave. The fourth and last point in the document focused on COVID-19 exposure in our practice. And if we look at this from the frequently asked questions section, the question that was asked was, if I or my staff member have tested positive for COVID, when can we return to work? And the information is quite straightforward, that we must immediately self-isolate and obviously contact our primary care providers or local public health unit. And then they distinguish 2 types of cases, mild to moderate, where there's a 14-day waiting period, 14 days from when the swab was taken, or those with serious cases who regrettably need to be hospitalized, the need for 2 consecutive negative specimens. Bottom line here, though, is make sure you contact public health. I think that's really the overarching message that we need to adhere to. So in summary today, this document definitely rattled a lot of us in these last few days. The basis of this document is that we have been introduced to a staged approach to the return to practice, which makes sense if you think about it in terms of the pandemic. If we just look up and see what's happening around us, and the understanding that we are going to be moving from one stage to the next, hopefully towards stage 3 and staying in stage 3, but it's going to be determined, as Manor said, on the numbers, on the incidence of COVID-19 in our community. The guidance is evidence informed, which reminds us that it's evidence that's evolving. It's emerging on a daily basis, and so it's incumbent on us to stay on top of it as more information becomes available. We've been introduced to the term essential care. We define that, giving us a broader scope of understanding of who and what we can do as far as care at this time. We know what we're getting ready for now. We've identified the race that we're into, and that has been defined now by specific PPE, which is a supply chain issue, continues to be, and a source of a lot of concern for all of us, and the engineering controls that are related to aerosol generating procedures. The most important thing, I think, for us to constantly be reminded of is that safety is our #1 priority, and this becomes really critical when we start to think about calling patients back and making sure that we're looking at them through that lens at every time, as well as taking care of our staff. And what we believe in, I think it's a core value of the dental community resource, we've been very consistent in these 10 weeks, is a sense of collegiality, fostering a sense of cooperation rather than competitiveness. Regrettably, because of the shortages of PPE, this is going to be challenging for us and to deal with that, and is a concern. And as Steve said at the outset, it's what has defined to some extent different ways of reaction, of response to this document. Steve, any closing comments?
I think that this competitive part is really what I'm so disappointed in. And I think it's been fostered, unfortunately, by the guidelines, although well-intended. I just think many of us feel that we have been, we've tried to be good citizens and done what has been asked for us all along, and it's left us at a disadvantage and a slower start than others who didn't do what they were asked to do early on. And I think there's just an inherent sense of unfairness that fuels anger, that gets people riled up. And I think we all just have to take a step back. If I can quickly share that when we had this document, the 3 of us spent a lot of time wrestling with our emotions on how we felt about it. And I think one of the reasons we decided to come back today and put this on is because I valued from our conversations within so many of you as we've had an opportunity to speak. So I think that we will get through this. This is not meant to harm us. It's meant to help us. We might be disappointed with what we read and frustrated a little bit with what we read, but all of this is the world we live in. None of it, and this is all caused by the virus. It's not caused by anybody else, by any ill-intended people. It's caused by the virus. And I think we have to just focus on staying safe and getting through it.
I just hope that there won't be any, with all due respect, bad actor colleagues that'll start seeing patients without following the right guidelines. That can really hurt us, their staff, patients, the public. That's starting to worry me. And I really do believe it pays to be safe in so many ways, financially and of course, most importantly, health-wise for everyone's sake. It's frustrating, it's tiring, but Steve, you're right. It's the virus. We can't control that, and we hope public health is, doing their best. And let's see where it goes.
Just as we described last week, it's safe to say, nobody knows how the COVID pandemic will end, but there's a sense out there, just looking at what transpired this past weekend, a beautiful, warm spring weekend, that it could indeed end socially before it ends medically. And all of us are experiencing that sense of fatigue, of exhaustion in being cooped up at home. Just want to remind you that our focus group conversations continue. Please feel free to sign up for them. You can do this on our YouTube, on the link available on our YouTube channel, as well as on our site. And Manor, you wanted to add to a new feature that we're working on. We've obviously, as the Tuesdays at 2 started as in response to the state of emergency in the province of Ontario. And we're obviously hoping that that's going to come to an end sooner than later. And so we're starting collectively, Steve, Manor, and I, and the rest of our faculty, to continue this conversation with you. Manor?
Yes, after so many weeks together and getting so much feedback from our dear DCR friends, we do feel like as the sun rises and the weather gets better, we'd love to give you a hug, so to speak, or an e-hug, but it's time to maybe see one another in the flesh. And we've had this really successful focus group going on for weeks and weeks, where we gather virtually with a few dentists at a time. I'd love to see you in the flesh, of course, according to public health strict guidelines, where we sit together, but with distance, and it could be even outdoors. It's something we're working on, but to be able to see you in the flesh. So just a heads up over there. It's time to now see one another face to face, carefully, cautiously, according to public health. But that's how we're thinking, and that'll really raise everyone's spirits and would be a beautiful way to move forward and learn together and work together.
Absolutely. Information will continue to be updated on our site. We'd ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please don't hesitate to email us at community@dentalcommunity.ca. Look forward to seeing you again for our 11th Tuesdays at 2. It may be our last. Tuesday, June 2nd is supposed to be the day that the state of emergency is going to be lifted in the province. And that's been our mandate collectively here at the DCRs, to provide you information during the state of emergency. So sit tight. We look forward to meeting with you again on that day. Please be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.